Well, hello again, and surprise, it's Doc Bell. This is yet another segment on Not Your Grandpa's Weed. Earlier on, I had mentioned that I was going to talk about Canada's low-risk cannabis use guidelines, and I neglected to do that. Alan pointed out, Alan, my videographer, tech, good friend and producer of this with me, that in fact I haven't gone over those guidelines, and so I'd like to add this as a postscript to the series and spend 10 or 12 minutes or 15 minutes reviewing these guidelines for you to learn about. I think they'll be very valuable if you're a parent or educator or a primary care health practitioner, if you're doing some counseling or informing people about this. The basis for these guidelines is that public health talks now about harm reduction. So it's not just a simple say no to drugs or say no to alcohol or this sort of thing. It's also recognizes that in spite of this, people are going to have a glass of wine with dinner, or there will be some people who enjoy a joint or some cannabis periodically, and so how do you do this safely? But also, how do we reduce the risk with young people, given the research that's coming out that shows that there is this potential for harm? And it's based on three fundamental points. One is age of onset of use of cannabis. So clearly, the younger you are when you start using weed in any form, whether it's an edible or an oil or hashish or whatever, if you're 13 or 12 or 14, it's not really a good idea because the impact on your central nervous system, on the biology in the brain, is more intense than if you're, say, a 22 or 23-year-old person. So the younger you are, the greater the risk. The more frequently you use, the greater the risk. And the higher concentration of THC, particularly if there isn't any the low levels of CBD, which is common now. These three factors combined kind of dictate what kind of risks are out there. So these are I'm going to go over the low-risk cannabis use guidelines, and then at the end of this, they will be shown on the screen for you to refer to. But there's one critical area that I'm going to throw in. This is my own opinion, but I've heard it before. These guidelines are a little on the soft side. At the top of the guideline, this should be written across. And I'm going to read to you, this is my bedtime story to you. Research has shown that the consumption of THC-containing cannabis products by adolescents carries significant risks of harm to their mental health, behavior, and learning. Canadian health organizations strongly recommend that adolescents avoid THC cannabis and related products. And I think that if you looked into this message would be there. In fact, when the Trudeau government was putting together the legislation back in 2018, the input they received from health agencies, public health agencies, mental health groups, was this legalization should be for age 25 and up because there was still development of the human brain at that time. Well, practically speaking, and the reality being what it is, obviously legislation has been pegged at 18 years of age and over. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, it is 19 years of age and over for purchasing or growing in most provinces. So here are the lower risk cannabis use guidelines. Recommendation 1, abstain. The lowest risk behavior is to not use it, okay? That statement, it just carries its own there. Recommendation 2, delay age of exposure. The later cannabis use is experienced, the lower the risks to the developing brain. Recommendation 3, use lower THC and higher CBD concentrations in products. Recommendation 4, avoid synthetic THC/cannabis products. I'm going to step out of this a little bit and say, you know, also I would be very careful purchasing online. My recommendation is, and I'm speaking to adults here as well, I have talked to people and having conversations since I've been interested in this that have stories that really will literally curl your teeth when you hear them, such as an adult male ordering online, smoking some product that had other substances in it, and at the end of the day is struggling with agoraphobia, anxiety, and has paranoid thoughts about people talking to him from one single exposure. These stories are out there, and it is a product of ordering online, coming from nameless, faceless people who are in the business and who are, not friends of yours. And I know this will get some real negative feedback and kickback, but that's a reality, and that is out there. So, but the synthetics themselves can be extremely potent and have unintended side effects beyond what you normally might expect from THC. You have to remember that these are chemicals that interact with neurons in the brain, and you can have some bad crap happen. Let's just face it, okay? And it's not just a bad trip. It's not a bad trip. It is serious biologic impact on the brain. Recommendation 5, A, avoid inhaled products to reduce lung irritation. And B, if using edibles, be aware that the effects may be delayed and impairment may last longer. Recommendation 6, avoid deep inhalation practices. And this is related to lung irritation. Remember, there are lots of other chemicals that you are absorbing. As far as I'm aware, and this is 2021, there is not any evidence that it causes cancer, but there is some evidence that it aggravates bronchial tube lining and can aggravate chronic bronchitis. So there is some evidence to that effect. Recommendation 7, avoid daily or near daily use. Once weekly or weekend use is preferred. Once again, this has to do with the half-life, and remember I talked about after 36 hours you've got 50% of it left in your tissue. After 72 hours you have half of that again, you have 25%. So 3 days later, still have a quarter of the total absorbed THC floating into the tissue. And if you're using every 2 or 3 days or even 4 or 5 days, this buildup will occur, and it will have an impact eventually on how the endocannabinoid, your naturally occurring cannabinoid system, works in the brain. And that will alter things for you very subtly, but very gradually. So try to spread it out. Recommendation 8, wait at least 6 hours and possibly longer after using cannabis before driving. I'm going to suggest, my addition, an additional 6 to 8 hours after that. In other words, if you have it at 10 o'clock at night and you wait 6 hours, arguably you could drive it at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would suggest add another 6 to 8 hours, because there may be areas in the brain, such as the cerebellum, that have receptors for THC that are still being impacted by the THC, but you're not aware of it. You don't feel high, you feel fine. But if you had to make a sudden move in your car or in your motorcycle to avoid an accident, you might be impaired. You might not respond the proper way. And that is really important to be aware of that there is probably a longer period than we realize. Recommendation 9, people with histories of mental health problems or serious mental health problems in their families, or persons who are pregnant, are advised to avoid cannabis use. That says it all. I talked about pregnancy before. I really am very passionate about this. Again, there is no reason to take cannabis when you're pregnant for any conditions that we're aware of right now. There are alternatives. If you're pregnant, please talk to your healthcare practitioner about what is safe to use for any medications for that matter. But certainly alcohol and recreational substances can have a real impact on the development of the infant, and you just want to avoid that. Finally, recommendation 10, combining a number of higher risk behaviors may increase significantly the risks of an adverse event. So for example, I read research where if you're using cannabis and you're having some liquor along with it, it changes the level of the THC in your system and may actually increase the impact of THC. But not only that, drinking alcohol as well, so really partying, you're having a dinner party or you're at a restaurant, you've had cannabis-infused salads, and there's bottles of wine on the table and all that sort of stuff. That may not come out really too good for you in the long run. As well, using the law with other recreational drugs such as ecstasy. Ecstasy fires up your serotonin system in your brain. It releases this serotonin, which gives you this really great mood, partying mood. But cannabis also releases serotonin as well as dopamine. And that combination of highly elevated serotonin can be harmful and can be really very dangerous, especially if you happen to be a teen or a person on antidepressants, which are elevating your serotonin levels anyway. So you really have to remember, these things carry a risk. The same thing with magic mushrooms. You combine these together to experience a really good high. What you're doing is really significantly altering the concentration of very critical chemicals in our brain. And you really have to think twice about that. I hate to rain on everybody's parade. I'm a pretty straight guy, button down shirt, old white doctor talking to you. But what I'm talking about is facts. It's just basically, I don't care if you're watching this from Mumbai, from Malmo, from Manchester, or from Miami. It's all the same across the board. And we're all humans, and we need to be really more sophisticated and understand this really well. So I hope this whole series is helpful for you, and you can put it to good use. And I promise, I think this is the end. I don't think you'll see me again. I'm gonna throw it out there. Al and I are gonna put it on YouTube, and for better or for worse. So thank you very much again for watching.